Hello, junior high students. I am your fourth and newest teacher, Mr. Donahue. I'm very excited to be joining your class this year. I've moved up from the third and fourth grade Sunday school classroom, so I'm hoping that being a young adult, I can really connect to you and focus on things that you may be going through as a preteen, a teenager, the things that we go through in life, approaching junior high and high school, and those types of different life issues, and how we can look to faith to better ourselves and make wiser decisions. This week we'll be starting off with the gospel reading, which is Luke chapter 6, verses 31 through 36. I'll read this for you just so you can understand. The Lord said, "As you wish that men would do to you, do so to them. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners. To receive as much again, but love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great. And you will be the sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the selfish. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful." So a quick takeaway from this, you know the saying, treat those others how you would want to be treated yourself. And this goes beyond that. It goes in depth because what credit is that to you? How are you bettering yourself and others? And I think that's a good lesson because people are going to do bad. We live in a world where there is sin, where the devil creeps. And it's good to note that if you are a sinner, that you still treat them, other people sinners, you treat them just as you still would like to be treated, even if they may treat you poorly, because then we will live in salvation with Jesus Christ when we one day hope to reach heaven. So I think this is a small snippet of the Bible, but I think a good lesson because as young teenagers, you should learn to treat others how you want to be treated, whether they treat you that way or not. For my lesson this week, I'm going to be looking into the early times in the church. Even we're going to briefly go over before Jesus was born. So we're looking back centuries ago, which is the Old Testament, because New Testament is after the birth of Christ, Old before. And there was prayers, there were gatherings of religious beliefs and communities. Interesting enough, they called it the Day of the Sun. The seventh day was the day that Jesus relaxed after creating the world and the universe. And this is the day that we now use as Sunday, but they called it Day of the Sun. They would read writings from the prophets, from the apostles. They would recite prayers very similar to what we do today in church, much less structured than our church service nowadays. But nonetheless, they still worship God and his almighty powers. It was interesting that I read they also used bread and wine to commemorate the body and blood of, I guess, God at that point, because Jesus wasn't around. And then they also did the same thing with donations. They donated money, those that were wealthy. Obviously, back then, the wealth wasn't spread around as much. There wasn't as much money in the world. So the wealthy would give back to the church. And then the leader, the president of the group, if you want to use that term, he would then distribute the money to widows, orphans, those less fortunate, and people of those sort. So there were gatherings even before Jesus because they praised someone mightier than them. And that's something I believe we should keep in mind today, because what is religion beyond that? We are holding ourselves accountable to a higher power. That's why we have rules. That's why we follow the 10 Commandments. That's why we live our lives holy and as a good Christian to better ourselves and to represent the Lord. We're now going to look into the 4th century. We're going to go to Constantinople, which was the capital of the Roman Empire, And that's sort of where religion started taking a base and having more formal gatherings. So we're going to talk about the Hagia Sophia, which is sort of the original built church that churches in the present day have formed after and taken after, such as the dome. Now, these were outdoors, so the dome wasn't complete, but the dome, like we believe today, represents heaven and light. So the dome would allow light in and sort of shine over the congregation and the priests and those there to gather. They would also talk about hymns. They would talk about the readings. It's very similar to we have today. It wasn't as structured because they didn't have the divine liturgy, but they still had gatherings and they would recite hymns and prayers. The Hagia Sophia was built by the Emperor Justinian, and this is sort of the basis of where churches come from today because he took time into it. He had the ambo, which is where what we would refer to today as the pulpit, which is where the chanters stand, and they had that just as we have today. They had the solia, which are the aisles, so people could walk through if it's a tight crowd, just as we have aisles today in our church. They had the sanctuary, which is for us, we refer to as the altar. That's where the priests are. And interesting enough, the congregation would be on the floor and the sanctuary would be on the second floor. So they were elevated so the priests could project their teachings, their readings, and things of those sort. The location where the congregation would sit would be called the nave. This is where the people gather. That's where they came to listen, and they would join in prayer. In the 9th century, that's sort of where it started forming to where we are today. They started making it more, they would have aisles, it was progressing because as society progresses, as technology advances, so did the church. And that's why today we have a structured liturgy. We have a structured hymns. We have the gospel readings of the day and things of those sorts. To wrap up our lesson this week, I would like to refer to a term that was called rite. And this is sort of what they referred to back in the 4th, 9th, 15th century as the ceremony that was being performed. It was the religious readings, the customs, the community. And I think this is an interesting term because today we refer to ourselves as Greek Orthodox, but we call ourselves parishioners and the congregation and things like that. And the rite is sort of how they referred to that religious community back in those early centuries when religion was becoming very prominent throughout the Roman Empire and all throughout the Middle East. That is all for this week. I hope you all have a blessed weekend and a blessed week at school, and I look forward to either another virtual lesson or hopefully when we get to that point where we can meet in person and really dig deep and have a nice discussion about our religious views and the divine liturgy. God bless.